water loop.
Welcome to Waterloop, the podcast that explores solutions for sustainability and equity in water. I'm the host, Travis Loop. This episode is part of a series, Mississippi by Nature, that looks at the use of nature-based solutions to help the river and its communities. The series is supported by the Walton Family Foundation and outfitted by Patagonia. Agriculture in Iowa is vital to feeding the world, but it poses challenges for water quality and flood management due to nutrient runoff and extreme weather. One innovative solution is the restoration of Oxbow lakes, former river bends that have been disconnected from streams. These revitalized oxbows filter out nutrients like nitrates, provide habitat for endangered species, and offer flood storage to reduce downstream impacts. In this episode, Brandon Iddings of the Iowa Soybean Association explains the restoration process. John Marshall, a farmer in Iowa, discusses the benefits of having oxbows restored on his land. With over 250 oxbows restored across Iowa and growing interest among farmers, these projects are delivering economic and environmental returns. First, I spoke with Brandon about the benefits of restoring oxbow lakes. Iowa Soybean Association. Who are you guys? What's your focus?
Yeah, so Iowa Soybean Association, we're a nonprofit. We have a farmer board group of 22 farmer members across the state. We actually have 15,000 members of soybean farmers across the state of the 40,000 Iowa farmers. So we have a pretty good membership group. We're focused on the profitability, the production, and the sustainability of Iowa soybean farmers. So we have a group of agronomists who are focused on in-field trials, focusing on how to make farmers more profitable in production on their actual soybeans that they're growing out in the field. We're also focused on the sustainability aspects. So why we're here today, look at these oxbow restorations, but we're also working on cover crops, no-till, nitrogen management, all these different things. So we kind of try and anything that is involving soybeans in Iowa or just Iowa farmers, we're trying to have a lead role in those areas.
Tell me about agriculture in Iowa. What's it look like? I mean, it's corn, it's soybeans, and some livestock, but talk to me about that.
Yeah, so Iowa's some of the most productive ground in the world. That's why we're so heavily agriculture. I think 85% of Iowa is in agriculture, so that is corn, soybeans. Today we're in a cow pasture, so there's cow pasture here, especially in the Northwest where we're at today. It's in a lot of these river corridors, but down southern Iowa, it's a lot more rolling hills. You get a little bit less productive soy and corn areas, so those are the areas where it's more heavily cow operations and livestock.
Why do we need so much corn and soybean? Like, why are these things so important?
Yeah, so to feed the world, like that's what Iowa is. Like we feed a ton of different livestock groups. We export a ton of our soy to countries across the world. It's a huge export for the USA, and that's the big thing, just feeding the world.
Yeah. What are some of the, I guess, challenges, especially at the intersection of agriculture and water for Iowa?
Our ag ground is so productive is because it's kind of in these wet soils that hold a lot of water. So we, at times, like right now, we're in a super wet cycle here in Iowa after 3-4 years of drought. So it's kind of these really dry times, really wet times. It's like occasionally we get in the middle, but not often, it seems like. So we have tile that is out in the fields that allows these wet areas of the field that allows us to be so productive to drain. So usually that's 4 or 5 feet below the surface. The water percolates down through the water, gets in those tile lines, and goes out to the creek. So today we're at an oxbow restoration where we're actually intercepting that tile, outletting it into the oxbow before it hits the creek, so allowing those oxbows to treat the nitrates in that water, slow that water down, allow some of the sediment, if there is any sediment in the water, to settle in the oxbows before it actually gets to the creek, which this creek flows into the North Raccoon, and eventually into the Mississippi and down into the Gulf.
Okay, and so that's I guess a bigger part of the mission, or is kind of the nitrogen and too much nitrate, right? Too many of the nitrates from fertilizer, from animals, from just the intense agriculture causing water issues, especially downstream, right? So there's this effort to put in a lot of different practices to address that. Could you kind of talk about that a
Yeah, and there's a lot of nitrates just naturally in the soil as well. So yeah, our goal is to be, we need that fertilizer on a lot of these acres to be productive, to be profitable. So how can we treat some of that water before it gets downstream, before it's used as drinking water or some of these other things downstream? So let's clean it up with these edge of field practices. We have, like I talked about earlier, we have our conservation agronomist group that works on the cover crops and the tillage. So those things are also going to reduce some of the nitrates leaving the field. It's going to keep them in the field and not allow them to go downstream. But then, like we're at today, we are at these edge of field practices. So those include like oxbow restorations, wetlands, bioreactors, saturated buffers, buffer strips, just so many different things that just kind of treat the nitrates by holding it for a time and then allowing it to flow out and join the rest of the water in the creeks.
Yeah, well, let's go to the oxbow piece. So talk about what happens on a farm that creates these oxbows.
Yeah, so first let me address just what an oxbow is. So an oxbow is an old meander of the stream that gets cut off from the main channel over time. Streams just naturally want to be straighter, so these big loops over time, that loop gets cut, and so over another period of time, these oxbows fill in with sediment, and then they lose their hydraulic ability. So there's not really, you're not getting the habitat for the fish anymore. You're not holding any water to treat nitrates. So they just kind of become these swampy areas that aren't productive. They're not, farmers don't like them. The cows don't eat the grass or the weeds in there. They're wet, so the cows are getting tromped in there, or they're out in the field and they flood out all the time. So most of these oxbows we're restoring are in these super unproductive areas. And so we come in with the landowners, with our partners, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, the Nature Conservancy, USDA, IDOL. There's so many different partners across the state. Oxbows are kind of like the cool thing to be doing right now in Iowa. At least maybe that's just me because I get to work with them, but it's pretty cool to be able to work with them because they are have so many of these stacked benefits. You're talking habitat, flood storage, water quality. The dirt we get from them is really good black dirt that we can put out in those unproductive areas of the fields where it came from. It eroded down slope into the oxbows, so let's put it back up on those sandy knobs so the farmers are seeing that highly productive ground restored.
Yeah, that's awesome. Could you talk a little bit further about the benefits you see when you put this dirt back up in fields and kind of what that does and maybe any numbers or anything that goes with that?
Yeah, so once we take the dirt out, we get contractors in here to do the projects. They take the dirt out to the field, and so like I said, these areas are usually sandy, bald knobs that they're not great production wise. So this is really good black dirt. And once it gets incorporated once the farmers kind of get it incorporated back into the field, they're seeing one farmer, and this is anecdotal data, but he was seeing anywhere from 10 to 20 bushels increase in his yields in his fields where we put this. Now, we're not talking huge areas. Most of these oxbows are half an acre to an acre in size. But you can still cover 5 acres of your field with 6 inches of black dirt. That's going to be pretty productive in the long run. So
that all adds up.
Yeah.
A bunch of these on a property. Could you talk about the process? How do you restore the oxbows? Just dig into that a little bit.
Yeah, so kind of we can start way back is like when we're looking at maps, it's a lot of just like, oh, where are these sites? So I'm kind of scrolling up and down the river corridors looking for, oh, this looks like an old oxbow star. There's a lot of maps from like the 1930s that you can go back and see where the actual river was flowing, and then compare it to 2024 now and see those differences. LiDAR, so it's another app we use where they're shooting lasers from the satellites down and they can see the elevation changes and stuff. So a lot of these different things, that's kind of the first step. So once we find them, if the landowner hasn't come to us, the last 2 years, we haven't had to do a lot of outreach. Landowners are talking to each other, so there's just kind of that person-to-person communication, and it way more successful than me just going out and saying, hey, this is on your ground. It's somebody's neighbor coming and talking to them about these projects. So I think that's way bigger. So once we're on the farm, either I do an outreach letter or then somebody's neighbor says, hey, you have this opportunity to go talk to Iowa Soybean. We'll go out, do a site assessment. So we usually shoot some elevations, try and figure out, just get some basic numbers. So how much dirt is actually in there. So we compare the elevation in the oxbows to the elevation in the creeks to see, it's usually, especially in the areas we're working in, 4 to 6 feet different. So that's how much dirt has filled in these areas. And once we do that, we kind of work with an engineer to get these areas designed. So the landowner is on board with exactly what we're doing. They know the numbers, they know where we're going to do it. Because this is all private ground in Iowa. Iowa's 90% plus private ground. So making sure the landowners are good with what we're doing. And after that, we usually get bids. So that's put it out to local contractors. They come in, take a look at the site, give us some bids, and then it's on to just construction. So it's either bringing in scraper equipment, so just a tractor pulling behind a big scraper, scooping the dirt, taking it right out to the field and putting it out, or top loading with an excavator. So there's a lot of that as well. And then it's just us checking the elevations. We like to get to the water table. So these oxbows, they're not actually connected to the creeks besides in high flows. So it flows in, and then once the river goes down, the oxbow disconnects from the creek. They're these off-channel habitats. Part of the reason we do that is for the predatorial fish that can get in. So we like to have these oxbow pools smaller. Specifically in this area, there's an endangered species, the Topeka shiner. So that's just a little teeny minnow. It's got some orange fins. It's a really pretty fish. The males have orange fins in the spring, early summer when they're breeding, but so that just allows the predatory fish to not get as big, to not just be able to eat all the fish in here. So, but yeah, after the construction and we do our checkout, it's really just, we're done, and they'll last for 50, 100 plus years. They did a U.S. Fish and Wildlife worked with a university. I can't remember the university at the moment, but we've been doing these oxbows in Iowa since 2002. So after the first 10 years, they had seen 2 inches of sediment built up. So these are going to last. I mean, we dig them back down to where they're natural. So hopefully, as long as it took to fill in the first time, it'll take that much time again. Erosion's natural. Like, there's things we can do to slow it down, but they're going to fill in over time.
It's awesome to me to hear about this, because it's really simple. And it's then, I'm chasing these nature-based solutions, and that's what you're doing, right? You're taking dirt, restoring a waterway, letting it do its thing, then taking dirt, putting it back on a field, letting it have benefits too. So, I mean, not to minimize it, but it's like, that's the beauty is in that simplicity almost.
That's what I love about them. I can go sell these. It's like, the river used to be there. Let's go put the river or an off-channel river back. Like, it's that simple, and like, that's why I think people are so on board with it, because it does have all these benefits, and it is these areas that are unproductive. So let's get as many benefits out of these areas as we can, and keep it simple. I'm all about simplicity on these projects. So yeah.
I'm a big statistics guy. Could you share about any statistics around the actual impact of these projects, and then maybe how many of these been done in Iowa?
Yeah, so some of my buzzwords as the first things I tell farmers are kind of these groups of statistics. So a 1 acre oxbow, depending on depth and stuff, but on average can hold about 1 million gallons of water. So in Iowa, we had some major flooding this year. So if we have a ton of these on the landscape, that's going to hold back a lot of water. I know over by Cedar Rapids, which has flooded a couple times in the last 20 so years, and forever really, they're starting to build these oxbows upstream of that, specifically for that flood mitigation aspect. Another benefit and another stat is the University of Iowa put out a paper that shows the success of these based on water quality. So 62% of the nitrates that are in these oxbows are treated. U.S. Fish and Wildlife, who's one of our main partners on this, started these practices here in Iowa in 2002. So the first 20 or so years, 22 years, they did roughly 200 oxbows across the state, and in the last year or two, we've done over 50. So these practices are growing. Everybody's trying to start doing these oxbows because they've seen how much success we can have and how many benefits that we can have on top of that success. So it's just kind of a no-brainer, win-win for everyone. One other just awesome thing is the endangered Topeka shiner. It hasn't happened yet, but the U.S. Fish and Wildlife has requested it to be downlisted from endangered to threatened. So here in Iowa specifically, these oxbow restorations are the #1 way on the species assessment plan to downlist that species. So by building this, we have found these Topeka shiners in these oxbows and have provided these areas of, I almost call oxbow restorations as nurseries for these little minnows. And so that's just another huge win showing the voluntary conservation of Iowa farmers to get these practices in, show that they're doing all this great work and having huge benefits to species, to water quality, just on their own. Like get simple projects, get the funding out there, and people are interested in them.
Well, you mentioned working with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Who else do you partner with to make all this happen?
Yeah, so probably our main partner is U.S. Fish and Wildlife. We work pretty much hand in hand with them on these practices. A lot of farmers are like, well, this is kind of a weird relationship, and it's not really, if you think about it, because our goals are the same. Their goals are conservation and habitat on the landscape, working with private landowners who want to do it voluntarily, and we work with farmers, and we're wanting to make sure farmers are, like I said, productive, profitable, and sustainable. So that's where we mesh perfectly. We can use our outreach with our farmers, because we're a trusted source here in Iowa, to then get on the farm, and then U.S. Fish and Wildlife can bring in the technical assistance part, their expertise in doing these projects, and it's a pretty easy partnership, and it just seems to work great. Some of our other partners, we've been working with the Nature Conservancy for a long time. They're doing a ton of oxbow restorations too. We work with USDA, Iowa Department of Ag and Land Stewardship, and a ton of other partners, just like how can we get the most opportunities for farmers, and how do we get those farmers into those opportunities that make the most sense for their farm?
And these are pretty low cost when you compare, when you consider other things that need to be done to remove nitrogen from water, right? Like this is a pretty low cost thing.
So I would say with all the benefits you're seeing, like a 1 acre oxbow, we're usually thinking it's around $25,000, and that's the more of the cost of that is the dirt hauling. So where are we taking the dirt? The further it goes, the higher the price. But the actual digging, if we're putting the dirt, if we have piece of ground right out of the floodplain, I mean, you can do them for $4 a cubic yard. And so that's just a huge benefit. I mean, and you're seeing all, like with all these benefits, I've tried to do cost benefit analysis. I'm not a scientist, so I hope somebody can take that on and show the actual cost benefit, but it's gotta be huge with the benefits to the fish, the benefits to water quality, the benefits to the farmers out in the field, all these different things.
Any idea, like if you've got a 1 acre oxbow, how much farmland is funneling to that?
Yeah, so it depends. So like the oxbow here behind us, it probably is only, it's got a pretty small watershed above it, so only a couple acres. But the oxbow here behind me, it's draining probably 40, 50 acres. And then we have one on the north side of the farm it's treating 160. So depending on how big these oxbows are or where they are, they can be draining hundreds of acres. We're doing one right now that it's a huge oxbow, but it's draining almost 5,000 acres of water. So it's not gonna be treating all that water, but it's gonna slow it down and treat a lot of it.
Next, I had a conversation with John Marshall about what he's seen on his farm.
Well, they've been a swamp all my life. I'm 40 years old, and I can think the one up north, that's the only one that I remember water flowing through. All these have been, the creek's been the way it was all my 40 years. Disconnected from these two. And all my life growing up, that one over there was just a swamp. Stagnant water. This one here, I've never really seen water in unless it flooded, and the water usually went away. That one did hold water. And, just not productive ground. And in non-productive ground, the best thing that grows in that ground is weeds. Cows do not like to drink, I couldn't say that. Cows don't like to eat weeds or the swampy type of grass. So restoring the oxbows took the poor land that was non-profitable to me and made it more profitable to me by giving the cows a source of water to drink out of and a source to get out of the heat and maybe cool down by laying in them.
By having them restored, is it giving them something more to eat?
Not really giving them anything to eat. We did try to replant some grass seed around the exterior of the oxbows, but this being the first year, it's just gonna take a few years to get the grass reestablished. But eventually we should have some decent grass around it.
Okay. And having them reconnected to the tiles in the creek and everything will help with that grass, hopefully.
I know this one here is fed by a 6-inch, 4-inch tile. 6-inch, was it a 6?
Yeah, I think so.
So this one here is, this field over here all drains down through here. Well, not all of it, but most of this field drains through here through a 6-inch tile that flows into this oxbow. So this one should constantly, as long as we have decent rain, stay at this level.
How much land is that, you know, like would be?
I'm guessing this oxbow is probably draining a good 45 to 50 acres.
As a farmer out here in Iowa, when you have people come to you that want to do projects like this, or come to your family, right? Like, what's the reaction? What's the thought process? Why do you all decide to do stuff like this in general, you know, involving water?
So when Derek and Brandon approached me about this, we've talked about it, and the land wasn't very productive in my operation. So restoring them was not gonna harm my operation in any means, but benefit it. And then if at the end of the day, we can maybe try to help save the Topeka shiners by giving them a habitat, I guess it's a win-win for the environment.
And maybe some benefits for the
And the cows, yes, giving a little benefit for the cows for another source to drink water out of and to get out of the heat.
Could you talk about that idea that, like, you're a farmer, you're in business, you know, and if you need to be, if you're doing anything extra like this, it's got to be, it can't be hurting your operation. It's got to make financial sense, right?
Correct.
Like, there's a lot of pressure. There can be a lot of pressure on farmers in Iowa and everywhere to, like, go do these kind of practices, right?
The way the markets are right now, you know, markets are pretty tight for the farmers. So we're trying to keep our operation running financially. And yeah, if this was going to hurt me and cost me money, I wouldn't have done it. So no, the benefits haven't really hurt me financially one bit.
We're 200 miles basically from the Mississippi River as we're sitting here, right?
Yep.
And we're even further away from that Gulf of Mexico that people talk about. What do you guys hear and feel about the health of that river or downstream communities or even the Gulf of Mexico? Is like people come to you and try to talk about that, you know?
You know, a couple of years ago when the nitrate levels were high over in the Raccoon Valley, I should say the Raccoon Valley, in the Raccoon River, you know, yeah, that's when the push for starting to do some of these saturated buffers kind of really started kicking in and doing buffer strips along creeks to try to help maybe stop these nitrates from flowing into the creek to help, you know, dissolve that problem.
If there's a focus, it's really on the local waterways, you know, not the stuff that's hundreds of miles or thousands of miles away.
Well, everything flows downstream to the ocean, so what we do here affects what goes to the Mississippi.
You're in the water loop. Water loop, water loop, water loop.